All right. Well, welcome everybody to the third session in our Threat Intelligence Foundation series. Um, I am Paul Jaramillo, Director of Threat Hunting and Intelligence for Sophos MDR.
And I am Jordan Olness. I am a threat intelligence analyst for the Sophos MDR practice. I work underneath Paul.
And today we're going to be focusing on a great topic on malware analysis. It's been around for quite some time, but it's just more recently become kind of a focus area in threat intelligence. So we're going to explore that a little bit today and hopefully give you guys some insight. So throughout the session, we're going to talk about, obviously define what it is and, hit different topics on, how do you actually analyze the file? What are you looking for? And give you some pro tips on how you can start to learn this yourself. So right off the bat, let's kind of just dive in. And Jordan, can you tell the audience, what exactly is malware and how is it used by the bad guys?
Okay, so malware, the word itself, is a portmanteau. It's of malicious software. And it's kind of an umbrella term that we use to describe any kind of software that's malicious. So this can be all sorts of malicious activities, thinking like, it could be a remote access Trojan, it could be information stealing malware, it could be ransomware. So really, it's an overarching term to describe a lot of malicious softwares.
Yeah, and so now that let's say we have a malware sample, what are the differences in the two kind of main approaches, static analysis versus dynamic analysis? Can you dive into that a little bit?
Sure. So for static analysis, we are taking a look at the malware without actually executing it, without running it. So we're using different tools to analyze it in different ways and find out information about it. Dynamic analysis is different. We're actually executing the malware, we're letting it run, seeing what it does, and coming away with different information. These tools get used for different reasons, come away with different results, and it's important to know both.
Yeah, and so with static, what are some of maybe the quick wins you can get? What are some things you can find out pretty easily when you analyze a static file with maybe like PE Studio?
For me, one of the things that I usually do to try and get quick wins, static analysis wise, I'll just look at the strings output. So these are strings of text that are in the program that the malware author wrote in there. Sometimes they get really sloppy and lazy and leave important things in there. Sometimes they just leave command and control server addresses in the strings. Sometimes they leave their names or usernames in the strings. This is, quick win territory, great, static analysis skill to have. Highly recommended to anyone.
Yeah, so much there that you can get pretty easily, like compile time, the type of compiler, import and export functions, all there ready to just kind of look at and incorporate into your analysis. Similarly on the dynamic side, what are maybe some quick wins you can get on the dynamic side, or what are we looking for there that static doesn't offer?
Really what we're looking for is like post-exploitation behavior. Static analysis won't necessarily see it connecting to a command and control server. Dynamic analysis will. If we're dealing with something like a packed sample, a little bit more on that later, it'll take that payload and actually put it into memory. You won't necessarily see that in a static sense, or it's going to be very difficult to find in a static sense. So you get a lot of really important information when you are watching it in a dynamic situation.
Yeah. So two of the core kind of approaches to kind of learning about malware. Now, I guess that brings up a different question though. What type of files typically require malware analysis? I mean, there's a ton of files that maybe are involved in a particular incident or a breach. Which files make the most sense to look at in static and in dynamic analysis?
It's a bit of a trickier question than you might think. Generally, when we're thinking of malware, we're thinking of a malicious program, somebody double clicks on it and it does bad things. You'd think that's the only answer, but no, it's a lot more complicated than that. We've got a lot of different means of executing code these days. We've got those standalone programs, but we've also got things like scripts. So PowerShell, JavaScript, Python, these aren't compiled programs, but they can still do all sorts of nasty things. We can also, looking at the very basic level of things, we could be looking at shell code. We could be looking at the raw assembly of just this instruction to the CPU to this instruction to the CPU. And that's another thing that you'd want to analyze. In terms of other things that you'd want, other file formats you'd want to analyze, anything that can contain data or contain that code. So, obviously zip files can contain malware. Of course, we want to analyze those, get the malware out of there. It can also be things like your Word documents, Excel documents. Everyone knows that they can contain macros, and those macros can be made to do very nasty things. So, those are just some of the common examples. Threat actors can get really sneaky. I've seen threat actors take a PNG image and attach a blob of a program onto the end of it, and that's where they smuggled their malware in. So it's the type of files you'd want to analyze is a lot more broad than you might think.
Yeah. So now we have some files to analyze. We kind of know the approach that we're going to take. But then we've got these pesky malware authors that want to make things tough for us. What are some of the anti-researcher, anti-analysis techniques that you might run into?
Really, it comes down to what's simplest for the malware author. It's what is the least effort for them. Most of the time, this is a simple obfuscation like base64 encoding. So it just takes their malicious code, their malicious program, makes it look a little bit different, and hopefully sneak it past an antivirus or an analyst or something. Things like that. Another really common approach is, they'll quite often have some kind of obfuscation tool. So takes their code and breaks it up and sends it into spaghetti code ways, and makes it tough for an analyst to understand what's going on, even a computer sometimes. Another really common one, packed samples that we talked about before. So this is where the threat actor will make a legitimate looking program and then kind of hide their malicious payload in it somehow, whether it's compressed or encrypted, and sneak that legitimate looking program in, and only later, once it's already running, then explode that payload in memory somewhere, and then you're off to the races. So those are some of the most common obfuscation techniques that I see in the wild.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the techniques that, are designed to kind of prevent them from running in a sandbox, checking if there's a virtual CPU, or checking, how long. So they may sleep for 30 minutes before it executes, just to thwart, kind of dynamic analysis. So the attacker definitely has a lot of advantages, but at the end of the day, we have their code, so we can manipulate it, right? So
Absolutely.
the speaking of, like what we can do, I guess now that we've maybe done some malware analysis and we have our outputs, how do we tie that back to threat intelligence, and how does it enable a better threat intelligence?
Really at all levels. This can be tactical levels, this can be strategic levels. Having more information about malware drives better decision-making about that malware. So take a hypothetical situation from kind of the MDR world. You've got an MDR analyst. They found a piece of software they think is malicious. They don't really know. They're pretty sure it's malware. What do they do? And so this is where a malware analyst would come in and look at that piece of software, determine, is it a piece of malware, and then what can we do about it? So, we want to be able to find things like command and control addresses. That takes analysis, typically static analysis. We want to be able to identify the type of malware it is. This will be things like, is it a remote access Trojan? Is it an info stealer? This is going to drive actions on the MDR side regarding, okay, if it's a remote access Trojan, block the command and control server. If it's an information stealer, we want to get passwords reset. And without that analysis, we don't have quite the context to be able to be kicking off defensive actions from MDR that we need to be doing. So this is, I mean, like I said before, more information about malware drives better decision making about malware in general.
Yeah, definitely agree. And that's really kind of our primary objective with our MDR threat intelligence program, is to support improvements in our incident response, making sure that we're harvesting all the intelligence we can, and then really pushing out protections across our entire customer base to make sure that, you know, what we learn from one incident is now protecting our 600,000 global customers. So for somebody new to information security, maybe not even necessarily in a blue team role, you know, they want to learn more about malware analysis. Can you share some pro tips for how somebody might get started in that?
Sure thing. I think the first thing I would want to put across to new people to the field is it's not one skill. I want to set the expectation that really this is a bunch of skills that you build independently and build over time. I'd want to impress people to give themselves time for things to sink in, because all of these skills together, they don't just develop overnight. Another thing I'd really want to drive home, when you sit down with a new piece of malware, have an objective in mind. Do you want to find a command and control server, or do you want to take the raw assembly code and reconstruct the entire source code that produced it? These are different objectives, and if you try and do everything all at once, you might get overwhelmed. So when you do sit down with a new piece of malware to analyze it, have an objective in mind, and when you're done, you're done. Just move on to the next thing. Another, starting out kind of piece of advice I'd give, if you are just starting out, don't have a lot of malware analysis skills, already, I'd recommend playing around with different sandbox tools. So this would be things like Joe Sandbox, VMray, Hatching Triage, all wonderful products. These are going to be there to help, hopefully, take a lot of information about what this malware sample does and condense it down into a more digestible form. So these sandboxes are great for things like I said, finding a command and control address, finding a persistence mechanism, wonderful tools for getting kind of to the point very easily. If you are familiar with what you get from a sandbox and you want to kind of move into doing your own analysis, a great place to start would be to do executable static analysis of your own. So this is where you're going to be using tools like PE Studio, PE Bear, CFF Explorer. This is where you're going to start to understand the executables themselves at a much more granular level. And you're going to build skills of your own understanding and your own analysis skills. So that's a nice, not too overwhelming way of building your own analysis skills. If you want to get into the world of malware reverse engineering, and what I mean by that is taking the compiled assembly code of a program and turning it into the original source code that produced it, that before it was compiled, you're going to be using tools like debuggers and disassemblers. These are skills that I would recommend building on their own and separately. When you move to a reverse engineering platform like IDA or Ghidra, you're going to be combining these kinds of skills in a way that if you don't already have those skills, trying to build them all at one time is going to be very difficult. So yeah, when you open up IDA and Ghidra, you're going to be presented with a whole pile of windows all over the place telling you all sorts of different things, and it can be really overwhelming for new analysts. I would recommend, build those skills on their own, disassembly and debugging skills, then move to something like a reverse engineering platform. Overall, go easy on yourself. There's a lot to learn. Give yourself time to sink in. There's a lot to learn here.
Yeah, it's definitely a large field of research for sure. And I don't know if there's very many people that know everything. That's why you see so much specialty, people specializing in ARM malware that runs on ARM architecture versus x86 architecture. Back to pro tips, though, I will say, though, definitely spend some time making sure that your an analyst VM is locked down and secure and doesn't risk you potentially infecting your host system, whether that's your home or personal system or home or
Yes.
work system.
Don't go exploding malware on any computer you really care about. That's very good advice.
Yeah, lots of free courses out, or not free courses, but free content out there. You can search for that. Also resources on GitHub. Lots of great books. I'll give a shout out for Practical Malware Analysis, Malware Analyst Cookbook, great resources. Even the new Ghidra book, if you want to dive into that, is fairly good as well. So with that, that is our session here today on malware analysis. I do want to highlight that we have 3 more sessions coming up. Our next one will be infrastructure tracking. So if you want to learn more about how to track adversary infrastructure and see where it's going before it goes live, that will be a great session. And again, if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see different content, go ahead and comment and we'll look into that as well. So thank you very much. Thank you to Jordan, and everybody stay secure. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.